несомненно, стоит остановиться. То есть, что именно считали те люди, которые, согласно ответу учеников, почитали Иисуса за Иоанна Крестителя или за Илью, или за кого-то из пророков. The question that I would like to ask now is what exactly people meant when they, according to Jesus' disciples, thought that Jesus was John the Baptist or Elijah or some other prophets. Should we understand this as a witness that at that time there were some popular beliefs that dead prophets or righteous people can resurrect and return back to live on the earth? Or was it a part of general belief in resurrection? Or this could concern only some important people from the past? And another question that is also related to this: how can the belief in a dead person returning to life, if he's really dead, reconciled with the general version of the biblical tradition, of the Old Testament tradition, towards old contacts with the dead people? This may also be important for understanding of how would the Jesus story, as told by his disciples, understood by a normal Jew at that time. What would be your opinion, Joel, on this question?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And I mean, we're dealing with popular beliefs and the sort of beliefs that I don't think leave many traces in written sources, at least from this time. So I think it's easiest in the case of Elijah, because Elijah,
Was not dead.
yeah, he wasn't really, he was taken up alive into heaven. And like Enoch, well, we have evidence that in about this era, Enoch was a figure who was felt to be alive and could communicate, could at least communicate with living people. And maybe, I mean, at the end of a certain section of First Enoch, I think, I forget what happens, but you know, there's like the author of the piece becomes identified with Enoch in some way. So, but I find your question very interesting, and especially the relationship to the forbidding of raising of dead people in the Old Testament, like with the Witch of Endor story.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that reveals that such practices were practiced. And so even though there is a forbidding of it in the Torah, you know, again, we're dealing with popular religion. And so it's it's possible that people believed a lot of different things about the dead and that the dead could be raised. I also think that a violent death like that of John the Baptist makes a person particularly numinous, particularly magical. It's a fascinating little window into a world that we really don't know that much about. Now, in rabbinic literature, Elijah does become sort of a figure who can be invoked and comes and appears to people and can help them in their distress. We also have evidence from the books of Maccabees, I forget which, first or second Maccabees, that Elijah was expected, or I guess that a prophet is expected at the end to solve all remaining halakhic difficulties. And that's the role that later rabbinic texts ascribe to Elijah, but that is when he will appear, at the time of the end. It's also interesting that Elijah is coupled with John the Baptist because John the Baptist is identified as the return of Elijah in various New Testament texts. So I don't know. What do you think?
No idea, but it's. I think it's important that when you spoke about rabbinic sources, you mentioned Elijah, and as you have just said, Elijah together with Enoch were regarded as being still alive. So it's not the case parallel to
John.
Parallel to John, or parallel to resurrection of any other of the prophets. It's not parallel to the case of the witch of Endor. Because resurrection of John or resurrection of any of the prophets except Elijah and Enoch, or even resurrection of Jesus, I think from the point of view of what one can call biblical orthodoxy, would have been as problematic as Saul's consultation with the spirit of Samuel. Of course, we have in the Old Testament cases of resurrection. For example, when we read about Elisha, who brought back to life the dead son of a woman from Sunan, but this was not return from the world of the dead proper, because he was not buried and he was brought back to life immediately after his death. It's also different from the case of Saul and Samuel and the witch of Endor.
Yeah. What this is quite similar to is the guesses that Herod makes in chapter 6.
Yes.
About who Jesus is. At least, so Herod mentions Elijah as one of the possibilities. And he also says something about, it's because he's John the Baptist. Herod doesn't mention Elijah. Herod mentions that he may be John the Baptist. But it's interesting, he says and this is invoking kind of ideas of necromancy, I think. That it's because he's John the Baptist raised from the dead, therefore that's why he can perform these miracles. So, I mean, one of the reasons that you want to invoke the dead is because they have access to the realm of God and the spirits, and they can do things for you. And I think that's probably why eventually, again, in rabbinic literature, Elijah becomes like a patron saint who can be invoked and who can help you in your difficulties. Even though, okay, he's not exactly dead, right? He lives in the realm of God.
Yes. Again, this also leads us to another important question about which I never thought earlier. May it be true that at least part of the answer to the question why the emerging Orthodox Judaism was so opposed to the early Christian movement was that from the point of view of biblical orthodoxy, the return of a person from the world of the dead, especially if this return brings with it some magical powers, is more in line with the case of the witch of Endor.
Yes, yeah, that could be, though, I suspect that, and, Gidi Bohawk, has a whole book about Jewish magic. Jewish magic never went away. And it was already, I think it was always kind of an underground current. And maybe looked down upon by some of, quote, the more orthodox members of the community. But yeah, and I think Christian claims for Jesus being alive could also be easily conflated with magic. And so that might be another reason to suspect the Christians. I mean, people always like magicians who are on their side and say that magicians who are on the other side are of the devil. And we have that in chapter 3 in Mark itself, right? There isn't, in the Beelzebul controversy, the scribes and Pharisees don't question that Jesus works miracles. What they do is they question, that he does so by the power of God. So my magic is always with the work of God, and your magic is always the work of Satan, if you're against me, which I know you're not.
Yeah, so that's how life is. А у кого-нибудь еще есть какие-то вопросы или добавления по поводу этой любопытной темы, которую мы сейчас подняли? Потому что мы как бы смотрим на все это дело уже сквозь призму христианской традиции, и внутри христианской традиции, по крайней мере, воскресение каких-то отдельных лиц – это вещь вполне библейская, даже напротив, в центре христианской Библии. Для иудейской традиции это все могло быть совершенно по-другому. Да вижу вопрос в чате. Может, в словах один из пророков не обязательно имеется в виду один из прежних пророков, а что Иисус новый пророк. We had a question in our chat.
Yeah, I see this. I mean,
Enough Russian to understand it, yeah?
Yeah, enough. Yeah. I mean, one other possibility that I think people connect with this, and especially with one of the prophets, is in Deuteronomy 18, you have the expectation of a prophet like Moses. I think probably originally that meant a succession of prophets, but in Second Temple Judaism, it becomes a particular expectation. I think we can see this at Qumran and other places, for a prophet like Moses, an eschatological figure. Now, in Christian expectation, that the prophet like Moses is merged with the Messiah figure, but that didn't always happen. And I think that at Qumran they expected two messiahs and a prophet. And the thing that is distinctive about the prophet like Moses expectation that I think helps in early Christianity is Moses was a miracle worker. And so when Jesus worked miracles or was thought to work miracles, then he could be connected with that expectation. Whereas there's not much about the Messiah, who's basically a king figure working miracles. But it's an interesting locution, haiston propheton.
Yes, it's interesting that we have suggested like John the Baptist or Elijah, but for example, Moses redivivus is not mentioned. Only the prophets.
Yeah. Though Moses is identified as a prophet, isn't he? And I mean, at the end of Deuteronomy, no greater
Yes.
prophet will arise. So, and yeah, Moses has a status there that is greater than all the prophets, than all the other prophets, I guess you could say.
I think that probably the grammatical feature that may argue against understand this haiston propheton as referring to a prophet like Moses for end of Deuteronomy is the plural definite article.
Yeah.
Hoi prophetoi, which probably refers, especially taking into account that this is a definite article, to an already fixed number of the prophets of old, not to a prophet, but to one of the prophets. And the hearer or the reader is supposed to know what these prophets are. Not sure.
Yeah. The word prophet doesn't occur very often in Mark. I don't think this is, yeah. In 1:2, as it was written in Isaiah the prophet. In 6:4, Jesus says a prophet is not dishonored except in his own homeland. In 6:15, so this is very much like 8:28. Others said that he is a prophet like one of the prophets. So it's the same locution. And then in 11:32, in the question of authority, John was truly a prophet. So those are the only references to prophets, whereas there's much more usages of the term many, many more times in Matthew and Luke. And Luke does invoke this whole prophet like Moses thing in the book of Acts. So I don't know what to make of all that, but and of course, all of these guesses in the context of the passage, they're wrong guesses, right? I mean, the correct answer is Christos.
Okay. So we come to verse 29, and according to our tradition, we are to ask someone to read this verse in Greek first. Руслан, вы с нами? Вас не очень хорошо слышно. Я видел, что вы включили микрофон на секунду, но он тут же почти отключился. Вас было не очень хорошо слышно. Нет, наверное, очень тихий у вас приемник-передатчик. Давайте тогда мы попросим кого-то с более громким приемником-передатчиком. Например, Лариса. Вы выступите нашей чтицей самого важного места?
Меня хорошо слышно?
Вас слышно прекрасно. И даже вы раздвоились.
Да, потому что у меня по одной линии плохой прием идет. Поэтому... М, 29-й, да?
Yeah.
Your display is has gone into chapter 9.
Wait a second.
Спасибо.
Мгм.
Okay.
Kai autos eperota autus jumeis detina me legete einai. Apokriteiz go Petros legei auto. Su ei go Christos.
Да.
Kai epitimesen autois jina medeni legosin periautu.
Да. Тогда он спросил их: а вы меня кем считаете? Петр ответил ему: ты Мессия. Иисус запретил им кому бы то ни было говорить про него. Мы в прошлый раз много останавливались на разных вариантах перевода слова «Христос» на русский язык. Вот, и помнится, эти места как-то перечислили. В некоторых случаях, мне кажется, уже текст для текста является презумпцией, что Иисус есть Христос. И там мы сохраняем традиционную передачу. Христос там, где у нас как раз этот вопрос выносится на повестку дня, мне кажется, естественнее, будет проще, даже понятнее, даже вот для человека вроде меня с библистическим бэкграундом, когда я мысленно представляю себе эту сцену в каком-то таком кинематографе, да, то мне это, естественно, легче понять, о чем идет речь, если на каком-нибудь экране Петр говорит: я знаю, что ты Мессия, чем если на каком-нибудь экране Петр говорит: Я знаю, что ты Христос. Даже для меня все равно уже слово Христос все-таки слишком уже является ассоциированным с христианской традицией. Такое,
This answer of Jesus in verse 30 is very interesting and I think somewhat ambiguous, though. He doesn't say you're right when you say that I'm the Christ, though I think that's the implication. Instead, he just, in this word that you've highlighted, he rebukes them and tells them not to say anything to anyone. And it's, the Matthew's version of this is so much better known. And in Matthew, Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So he adds the Son of God thing. And then Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," and commends him for what he says. Whereas here, he doesn't directly commend the answer, he rebukes it. Or at least he tells them strictly not to tell anyone. So there's the messianic secret motif. And I think, the whole passage, it doesn't end here, because then, of course, he goes on and predicts his suffering, and that Peter doesn't like. And Peter then rebukes Jesus, and Jesus rebukes Peter in turn. So there's a lot of rebuking that's going on in this passage. And I think maybe the point is that it's important to get not only that he is the Messiah, but also what sort of Messiah he is. Namely, one who will suffer, die, and be raised again.
yes, as you see, I marked this word with yellow because this created a lot of difficulties before me as a translator, how to render it.
Of course, it's the same word that Jesus used to rebuke the demons.
Yes, exactly. If you look at in what contexts this occurs, then the first occurrence is Mark 1:25. Jesus rebukes the demon. Jesus rebukes the demon not to tell anyone about his identity. Then in 3:12, once again, the demons are telling people the identity of Jesus, but Jesus charges them not to make this open. We have the same verb epitimao in Mark 4:39, but as far as I remember, we already at that passage spoke a bit about this verb, that in the overall context of Jesus' struggles with the demonic powers, here the wind animos can also be regarded as some kind of a force that Jesus must subdue, some kind of force that is opposite to Jesus, though it is not exactly called a demon here, but this also continues the line. While our passage clearly refers back to Mark 1:25 and Mark 3:12, because the same word is being used in the same context, namely reproaching Peter that they are about to disclose Jews' identity. Exactly the same pattern that we saw earlier with regard to demons.
Mhm.
I think in the context of all our earlier talks about the role of the disciples in Marka narrative and the negative connotations that they have from time to time, and can we regard using this particular verb? Can look at other contexts, Mark 32 and Mark 33, that we're going to talk about maybe even today. Once again, Jesus betimison Petro, and the parallelism with the earlier case where Jesus a bit messy, something to demons, is even stressed by the fact that Peter is explicitly called Satan here. Yes. Eupagopism Satana. So this makes these associations even clearer. In Mark 9:25, once again, Jesus rebukes demon. Mark 10:13 is a different context. That's Jesus' disciples and the children, and also people that are trying to prevent the blind man. But once again, this is not so far from earlier references, from earlier occurrences of this verb, because it's not Jesus, but the people still, or they're preventing the blind person from disclosing Jews' identity. The whole network.
Well,
This
and I think you can say in Mark, epitimao it's a technical term for addressing and rebuking demons. You know, it has this demonological, even in things like 10:48 and 10:13, I think there's an undertone of, these people are maybe tools of Satan, or Satan is somehow involved in this. And I did find when I was working on the first half of the commentary that ga'ar, the Hebrew term and Aramaic term, it is constantly used in exorcism and other magical contexts in these Aramaic magical spells. That there's these, 2 volumes, Naven Shaked, of Aramaic magical spells, and this term is used constantly. So I don't think in the Hebrew Bible it's specifically associated with exorcism, but by the time of around, the first few centuries of the Christian era, it becomes a technical term for exorcism.
we can look at the Hebrew Bible usage of Ga'ar. It's not a problem.
I mean, it is used in the Hebrew Bible for God like rebuking the sea, So that's like some of these Markan.
Yes, that's what I had in mind. Wait a second. Not so many passages, so we can look at them. That's Father rebuking Joseph just for his wrong dreams. Not you should not rebuke Ruth. Then you thought God rebukes nations, and even closer to the Second Temple usage that you spoke about. God is asked to rebuke the wild animals of the reeds, and the gathering of the bulls, which may by the Second Temple time had some connotations with the powers of evil. And of course, not rebuked the Red Sea, but rebuked the arrogant ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say in passages like these last two that the nations become, symbols of a power like the power of the sea, which is against God.
Yes. So most often the R is used with regard to God yes, God will not rebuke Jerusalem and people of Judah. And God threatens the sea. God rebukes Satan.
Yeah, that's an important one. I think, as I recall, there are one or two usages at Qumran that are maybe in fragmentary contexts, but they may be demonological. But the real treasure trove of references is in these Aramaic texts, but they're the remains of them are later. Like I think they're 3rd or 4th century. These magic bowls and other magical inscriptions. So there is a dating problem. They're not Second Temple texts.
Yeah, but of course, they may continue the tradition that emerged in the Second Temple.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the passage from Zechariah is especially relevant for our place in Mark, because the combination of gar, which is usually perceived as the background for the epitomao in this passage, and also the image of Satan. Both images that once again come together in our passage when Jesus speaks to Peter.
Yeah, no, that's a very important one.
And the verb is, the Greek verb is the same as in our case. Apen curios proston diabolum. Epitomesai curious, and so is diabole. I think this is evidently the main background. Okay, but let's go back to our. I see. Маша, вы прислали.
Я прислала ссылку на место, где
на время передам трубку.
Да не надо, мне кажется. Я просто ссылку дала на вот этот, это как это называется, апокриф на Бытие из Кумрана, где Гаар как раз значение экзорцизма.
Я почему-то не могу открыть. Считаю, что он был всем виден.
Да, мне кажется, все посмотрят. Итак.
Yeah, that's an important passage.
Yeah, it looks like it's the only one.
Yeah, I thought I found one or two others, but
yeah, maybe, I don't know.
I'll see what I've got.
Yeah, the other examples are from amulets, so it's GPA, epigraphic Jewish Palestinian Aramaic, so from later texts.
Yeah.
And this one is early.
I think there were some others from Qumran, but they were from very fragmentary texts that and one of the things that interested me in these later texts, the Aramaic bulls and so on, is that the term is used both for exorcisms, but also for what happened in the beginning when God rebuked the sea and created order in the world. And so, I do wonder sometimes if in these sort of contexts, the idea is that in casting out the demons, God is, he's saying, it's like restoring the beginning. Let there be light. Let there be order in the cosmos. Let these evil powers be tamed. Because, as I understand it, in ancient Near Eastern myths, oftentimes the world is created out of, chaos as a monster, which God not only rebukes, but destroys to create the world. And there are some passages like in Isaiah and the Psalms that seem to reflect that idea. Though, Genesis 1 is kind of a demythologized version of that. But still, these ancient Near Eastern myths are in the background. And it makes me wonder if, even in Mark, there's sort of a cosmic dimension to Jesus' battle with the demons. he's not only battling with individual beings, but he's also creating a new world.
Yes, rebuking the sea is definitely an important background for the scene where Jesus rebukes the wind on the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
It's more difficult to see the link between these archaic images of God rebuking the sea and the chaos, the primordial chaos, and other passages we're talking about, where Jesus rebukes demons and disciples in order that they do not disclose his identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the question is whether epitomon is a verb that is sort of a gestalt. It invokes a whole series of ideas, and including these archaic ideas about what happened at the beginning, and again in these Aramaic texts, this link is explicitly made in some of the passages there, that in rebuking the demons, the exorcist or God is invoking the power of the beginning.
Yes. The question for translator is how one can render all this in Russian or in English.
Yeah, and what does zapretil?
Just forbade.
Just what?
Forbade, forbidden.
Oh, forbidden. Okay.
Of course, this verb both in Russian and in English does not bring with it all the associations that we spoke about.
And did you translate it with zapretil in the other instances in Mark also?
Yes, in most of them, yeah.
Huh.
Русскоговорящие друзья, если у кого-то из вас будет идея, мы сейчас с вами посмотрели вот на всю эту сеть, на всю эту network of associations. Если у вас будет идея, какое русское слово, что можно было бы еще оставить, запретить, повелевать.
I think of this verb as, what a parent would do to a kid who is being naughty.
Sorry?
I think of this verb's epitimon as what a parent would do to a child who was being bad. Say, stop doing that, you little rat.
Окей. И как мы это назовем по-русски?
That, there's an association not just with trying to shut up the demon, though in some of the passages, Jesus does say, be quiet or shut up, don't talk. But
yeah. Phimosophy, for example.
Say what?
Phimosophy.
Yeah,
This
right, exactly, yeah.
He uses in speaking with the demon.
Yeah. But I think for me, what the verb implies basically is just you're telling somebody that what they're doing is wrong, and you're doing it in a fierce way.
Заругался. Родители стали ругать ребенка.
Okay.
but
So could you use that here? Rugal?
it has some important connotations, but it couldn't be used in this context.
Mhm.
Иисус отругал их, чтобы они никому не рассказывали про него. Это, может быть, передавало бы в каком-то смысле вот то напряжение, о котором мы сейчас говорили, но все равно контекст не подходит. Окей. Про образ мессии, мессианского секрета мы уже говорили, будем еще возвращаться, когда снова будем встречаться с темой мессианского секрета. Давайте перейдем к другому стиху, который тоже занимает центральное место. Евангелие от Марка, видимо, именно как раз соположение этих двух стихов. Петр говорит ему: ты Мессия. И предсказание в стихе 31 как раз и задает, можно сказать, сюжет Евангелия от Марка. Петр ответил ему: ты Мессия. Иисус стал учить их, что Сыну Человеческому предстоят тяжкие страдания. Но давайте, Ларис, попросим вас, соблюдая традицию, прочесть греческий текст.
Kai erxato didaskein autus potidei ton gion tu anthropu, ola patein kai apodakimastenai yupoton presbyteron kai ton archireion kai ton grammateon kai apoctantenai kai meta treis gemeres anasthenai.
Да, и он начал учить их, что Сыну Человеческому предстоят тяжкие страдания, и что он будет отвергнут старейшинами и старшими священниками и толкователями Писания, что он будет убит и через 3 дня воскреснет. Мы уже неоднократно отмечали здесь особую роль глагола «архумай» Марка, да? Он начал учить их, а этот архумай может обозначать то, что он в первый раз стал учить им, да? Происходит нечто, что потом еще будет повторяться. Но дальше действительно мы увидим сравнение 3 разных предсказаний, которые в Евангелии от Марка стоят как 3 какие-то такие метки на пути Иисуса в Иерусалим и на крест. Your commentary, Joel, I think I read that you suggest that this expression in 3 days, meta tres hemeros, may not be taken literally, but may refer just to a short period of time. But I don't remember what were your arguments.
I don't remember either. There is a passage in Hosea that has this expression, right? After 2 days and after 3 days, you will raise us up. And I'm not sure if that was my argument or if that was something that others have said that I was arguing against. But it's an argument that has been made that, it's like Italians say, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Does that mean exactly 5 minutes? It could mean like half an hour, or it could mean 2 minutes, though usually not. What do I say here? After sometimes.
Let's look at what you say in page 2.
Yeah, okay.
2.
That would be page 487.
Yes. For 3 days.
So I cite the Hosea passage there. Yeah. Hosea 6:2.
Hosea 6:2 is not an easy passage either.
Mhm.
Маша, вы у нас теперь главная специалистка по России. Что нам скажете про Россию 6.2? А я тем временем посмотрю древности Иосифа Флавия.
Я 6 главу пока плохо знаю. Не могу так сразу сказать, что там.
Вы специалистка только по первым 3 главам.
Ну, по первым 5, скажем. И некоторые местами. Ну да, мне кажется, что Осия похож очень действительно.
Маша, можете вывести на экран? Я пока...
Сравнение.
Что?
Ну, мне кажется, в Осии действительно должен быть тоже такой смысл, как скоро просто.
Да. А можете вывести на экран? Просто я сейчас с Иосифом тут копаюсь.
Видно ли то, что я ввожу или нет?
Нет. Может, мне нужно остановить совместное использование? Да, вот сейчас стало видно. Угу.
Мгм. Да. Ам. Да, в общем, Бог оживит нас, восставит нас на 3-й день, и мы будем живы перед Ним. Мгм.
А что в предшествующем стихе, Маша?
А в предшествующем стихе Лихува Нашува, пойдем, вернемся к Богу, потому что Он Его Тараф в Ерпаэну, да, потому что Он нас прорвал, а потом исцелит нас. Ях в Ях Бешену, да, поразит нас и перевяжет нас.
It's supposed to be the most corrupt text in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
Hosea.
Or probably the only one written in a non-Jerusalem dialect.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't know that. So that's the problem?
There are some suggestions that it was written in the dialect of the Northern Kingdom. Since
I do not believe it.
I mean, 6:3 doesn't seem like a problem grammatically.
Yeah, it's 6-2.
6-2 is more of a problem.
It should be
Yeah.
6-2.
6-2, I mean, yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
different formulation.
Yeah, of course. Meaning is difficult to
Yeah.
grasp.
And I guess the reason that people talk about this is they're concerned about, something that wasn't the main focus of my commentary. Could the historical Jesus have said this? And, they want to say, those who make this argument, which I'm not sure I was endorsing when I cited it, they want to say that, okay, it's more likely that Jesus could have said something like 8, whatever it is, if he, if 3 days was just a general term for being resurrected at some point shortly thereafter. Because, there is kind of a problem, isn't there? Here, doesn't it say meta tres hemeras in 8, wherever we are? Yeah, kai meta tres hemeras. So what does that mean? Does it mean, because in the Christian understanding, Jesus was crucified on Good Friday and resurrected on Easter Sunday? That's really not after 3 days, but after 2 days, on the 3rd day. So that's part of the problem with this expression, meta tres hemeras. It doesn't really correspond to what Mark himself narrates, unless you understand, and there's complicated arguments about this, meta tres hemeras as meaning the same thing as on the 3rd day. And I think I take that up somewhere or other, or maybe not here.
There are 3
And-
different.
Allusion to Hosea? How do you think?
Yeah, and I think they invoke the Hosea. And in the Hosea, it says on the 3rd day, right? Yeah. But that's not what Mark says here, right? He says meta tres hemeras, after 3 days. So that's somewhat puzzling. I mean, it would work better if he had an explicit reference to Hosea and said on the 3rd day.
Yeah.
That would correspond more to Mark's own story.
So
Which-
Hosea fits better to gospel than Mark himself.
So if we were advising Mark, I think we would say, stick with Hosea.
Yeah. It's funny.
Маша, можете еще раз вывести Осию на экран? В чем у нас проблема, что не тот предлог у Марка, чем в Осии?
Нет, там просто сказано на 3-й день. Н. В смысле Бьем. Так и сказано, да. Байом хашлишит сказано.
Bayom Hashlishi.
Сейчас, простите, я просто хочу посмотреть комментарий. Минуту.
Но мы не знаем, какие альтернативные версии септуагинты были в это время.
Не знаем, но resurrection на третий день. Да, вот Адонис, он восстал из мертвых мета те гетере гемере. То есть это получается после второго дня, тоже на третий, да?
Это где, Маша?
Это я читаю комментарий Вольфа на Осию. Да, ну другие боги в разные дни восставали из мертвых. Осирис вот на 17-й день. Нет, на 19-й, извините. Он на 17-й умер, а на 19-й воскрес, извините. То есть это получается он через сколько дней? Тоже на третий, да? Воскрес. Да. То есть все все-таки на третий день воскресают. Да, а вот и Нанна, она спустилась в мир мертвых на 3 дня и 3 ночи. То есть, получается, на 4-й день она восстала.
Но это же все как-то очень может легко друг другом путаться. Через 3 дня или на 3-й день. Это и мы сами можем перепутать эти два выражения.
Да, а в других местах в Новом Завете вроде тоже на третий день, да? 1 Коринфянам 15:4.
А вот Лазарь на 4-й.
Я на 4-й?
Я говорю, Лазарь на 4-й день был воскрешен.
Коринфянам 15:4 тоже те мера те трите. То есть на третий день тоже. То есть Коринфяна так же, как Павел также считал, как Осия. И Лука 24:7 еще. Можно посмотреть.
Маша, можете вывести эти места на экран?
Да. Так. Да, вот это я читаю комментарий Вольфа на Осию. Видно?
Да.
Да, вот он тут приводит некоторую информацию про то, когда кто воскресал. Вот он приводит, что согласно Лукиану, Адонис, он воскрес мета де те гетере гемере, да, то есть после второго дня. Вот. А Сирис умер на 17-й день, а воскрес на 19-й, то есть тоже на 3-й день. Вот. И дальше вот он еще говорит, указывает на 2 места из Нового Завета, где тоже на 3-й день именно говорится. Я собиралась показать. Да, вот у Луки те трите гемера и что там, 1 Коринфянам, да? Тоже. Те гемера трите.
So I see that in my commentary, I try to work with this discrepancy, and I say there are several Old Testament passages in which an activity goes on for 3 days and then ends on the 3rd day.
Мгм.
And I cite, for example, Genesis chapter 42, verses 17 and 18.
42.
17 and 18. Okay, so
Oh, yeah,
he
so
was
45.
in jail for 3 days.
Yeah.
And then in the next one, and then on the third day,
Yeah, that's right.
so the activity has gone on for 3 days, but on the third day, so you have the combination of those two expressions. And I also cite Exodus 19, verses 11 to 16.
19?
Yes.
Mhm.
Where you have that same
Yeah.
variation. And
Yeah.
also Esther chapter 4, verses 16 and following.
Okay,
So
so meta trace hemeres can be on the third day.
Yeah. I think,
John,
yeah,
are you referring to a particular passage or page from your commentary?
yeah, page 606.
Okay.
It's the next page from the one that you showed before.
Page 600.
And 6. 606.
606. Okay.
I think that's an alternate text in Revelation for 666. 606.
I see, yes.
And so I claim that after 3 days and on the third day can mean the same thing in biblical contexts.
Mhm.
But I still think it's puzzling why, this passage in Mark, and I think the other passages in Mark use meta tres hemeras when you've got this very nice ente trite hemera, and it invokes Hosea, and it corresponds to the Christian story, and it corresponds to this Pauline text in 1 Corinthians, which I take it is a pre-Pauline formula, for pre-Pauline list of appearances. I still think it's puzzling.
Yes,
That
but if the tradition of Hosea was living in the Jewish Aramaic milieu,
Mhm.
then the form through which this tradition could have reached Mark or his sources may have been quite different from the Septuagint.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Well, a lot of things are possible. Yeah. I
I
always say
checked.
to my students, a lot of things are possible, but what is probable?
Yes, I checked. In any case, I checked the critical edition, the Septuagint, and the revisions, and they do not the critical edition does not reflect any textual differences at this point.
Mhm. Like in the Hosea text, for example, none
Yes,
of them.
yes, I looked at the
Yeah.
critical edition of the Greek Hosea,
Yeah.
the Greek edition.
I mean, but that just may mean that, for maybe the Christian tradings of the Septuagint, both after 3 days and on the third day were important expressions.
Mhm. Okay, let's return back to our text. Ну, насчет перевода СБЧРН, КАРХЕРЕОН, КГрамматеон. О переводе этих терминов мы, кажется, уже говорили. Почему я считаю, что грамматео здесь скорее какой-то толкователь писания, человек, связанный с писанием, чем просто, скажем, грамотей или писец. Явно, что здесь речь идет не о том, что человек знает грамоте, а о том, что он толкует иерограммата. Да, Лариса прочла нам уже 32 стих. Он начал говорить прямо, ничего не скрывая, паресия. Здесь я пытался как-то передать значение паресия по-русски, пускай даже мне получилось намного больше слов, чем по-гречески. Мне кажется, что вот этот оттенок ничего не скрывая, иначе трудно передать. Я говорю прямо, ничего не скрывая. Петр,
Think-
пожалуйста.
Before we leave, I think it is interesting, so he told the disciples in verse 30, don't say anything to anyone. But here, verse 32, kai paresia ton logon elale, kramo.
Yes, exactly.
So that must be a deliberate contrast between the secrecy that they are to use in talking about him as Messiah and the fact that he openly says that he's going to suffer.
Yes, there's definitely a contrast, but the question is whether the contrast is between his identity as a suffering one and his identity as a Messiah, that his identity as a suffering one should be spoken parousia openly, while his messianic dignity should be kept in secret. Or whether the opposition here is between two circles, the insiders and the outsiders. Because in 32, he was talking to the insiders. He was talking parousia. While in verse 30, he was asking, well, not asking, but rebuking these insiders not to tell the outsiders about his identity. There is a definitely a contrast between verses 30 and 32, but this contrast can be understood at least two ways.
That's a good point. And yes, certainly it could be that the contrast is between don't let the outsiders know, but amongst us insiders, we should all know this. But yeah, I think it's important that the messianic image, which is basically an image of triumph, is qualified and even rendered paradoxical by being associated with suffering and death. And, I don't think Jewish messiahs were supposed to end up crucified on a Roman cross. If anything, the expectation was the opposite. Like in Psalms of Solomon 17 and 18, the Christos, repels the Romans. You going to disagree with me, Maria?
No, I just probably it's something what was commonly discussed, but I just don't know. But I was thinking about this this list of possibilities who Jesus was. John the Baptist, or Elijah, or a prophet, and my idea was that all these all these images, all these heroes are those who about whom also it was discussed whether they were Messiah or not. At least John and Elijah and some prophet as well, as we know from other texts. And so in this context, so this, I don't know how to formulate it, but it looks like they first they they list different possibilities of those who could be messiahs, and those who already suffered and were dead and then resurrected. And yeah, probably I can say it in Russian because it's a bit difficult for me to formulate what I want to say.
Sounds interesting, yeah.
Да, я хочу сказать, что, я не знаю, Михаил Георгиевич, может быть, это обсуждалось уже, я пропустила это как-то, но моя идея в том, что вот эти герои, кого они перечисляют сначала, возможности Иоанн, и Илья, и кто-то из пророков, это как бы некие претенденты на роль Мессии, правильно же? Вот, и в этой парадигме в их получается, что они как бы, то есть те герои, которых они как бы могут считать за Мессию, они тоже должны быть уже воскресшими, да, то есть они как бы, получается, что вот в этих вот вариантах они, ну, в смысле, что они не противопоставляются его идентичности как Мессии, да, а они спрашивают, как бы, ты уже вот этот воскресший Иоанн? А он говорит, нет, я еще, так сказать, мне еще предстоит умереть и воскреснуть, что я как бы, я не он, а другой. Не знаю, понятно?
Я, может быть, так сформулировал ваш вопрос, что по сути дела те ответы, которые люди здесь предлагают, Иоанн Креститель, Илья и пророки, они отчасти уже немножко намекают и на слова Петра о том, что ты Мессия, поскольку какие-то мессианские чаяния с этими персонажами связывались. А с другой стороны, они отчасти намекают и на слова про грядущие страдания, поскольку Иоанн Креститель точно пострадал, вот, но некоторые из пророков, согласно позднейшим легендам, тоже пострадали.
Ну,
Вот.
или, по крайней мере, да, или, по крайней мере, если это какой-то пророк уже из тех, кто умер, то это в любом случае должен быть кто-то воскресший. Да, то есть, что вот этим перечислением он действительно, да, как бы сразу такой идет намек на то, что Мессия — это тот, кто воскрес, да. То есть, ну, это, мне кажется, что когда я писала вот про Мессию, мне кажется, была какая-то такая идея общая, которая высказывалась разными комментаторами и авторами, которые про Мессию пишут, что для новозаветных авторов очень явным образом как бы мессианский статус, он немыслим без, собственно, воскресения, да, и что ну, с этим связан вообще вопрос о том, вообще вот этот вопрос о том, был ли Иисус Мессией, насколько он исторический, да, то есть вообще возможно ли был, можем ли мы говорить о том, что его называли Мессией до собственно, воскресения, или это уже то, что как бы мессианский статус он получает только после воскресения?
I think there is some evidence that in some circles the Elijah expectation and the Messiah expectation coalesced. Though again, it may be later, it may be in rabbinic texts. And of course, with John the Baptist, we know that some people thought he was the Messiah, like even like from the pseudo Clementines in the early 2nd century. They're arguing against people who think that John the Baptist was the Messiah.
Yeah, it is attested in Luke as well. This idea that somebody said that John was Messiah. It's Luke 3:5.
Okay.
Yes, it's.
Oh yeah.
So my question is that when they ask Jesus, "Are you John the Baptist?" they somehow ask him whether you are already risen Messiah or not yet risen.
I see. You said Luke 3:5? I don't see it in Luke 3:5.
No,
Acts
maybe
3:5 maybe?
maybe I'm wrong. Just 1 second. I'll check it. I closed it. Yeah, I'll find.
I believe you, but yeah, but it's not there. Okay. Yeah. Which Messiah are you? I mean, I guess what this passage does reveal is that there were a lot of expectations going around, and that the ideas, were very fluid.
I think Masha meant Luke 3:15.
3:15,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay, good. Yeah, perhaps he was the Messiah.
And yeah, and just in this context, this juxtaposition of this revelation about that Jesus is Messiah is with prophecy about his death is very logical, because he just says, yeah, I'm not risen yet, but I'm going to suffer and be dead and then rise.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, you do have, I think you could also cite the prologue to John, as, I mean, that is saying Jesus is the light. John the Baptist was not the light. He only came to bear witness about the light. And so I think there was competition between followers of Jesus and followers of John the Baptist. It's very clear from the beginning of the Gospel of John, and also there's a passage in Acts where Paul comes on people who haven't even heard about Jesus, but they're followers of John the Baptist. And again, I think that competition continued into the 2nd century. And, still today, the Mandeans revere John the Baptist and think that Jesus was an imposter or worse. But that's a whole other subject.
Okay. So we read through some of the most important verses. Мне кажется, что очень интересно действительно ваши мысли, что вот уже в этом списке, который дается в 28 стихе, одновременно дается и намек на мессианское достоинство, и намек на грядущую смерть, и намек на грядущее воскресение. I think it was important thought. I have never thought about this earlier, that Maria expressed that already in the people's guesses in verse 28, there were 3 important hints. A hint at the messianic dignity, a hint at the future death, and a hint at the future resurrection. It's interesting. Okay, Joel, you told me that next Thursday you will not be with us.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. So we meet in 2 weeks, and by that time I'll send all of you new Zoom link so that we should not be dependent on our Zoom of лаборатории ненужных вещей.
Хорошо.
Okay. Joel, do you have some time
Yes.
after our meeting?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Maybe we can just leave people.
That would be lovely.
Okay.
Спасибо.
Тогда мы встречаемся через 2 недели.
Yeah, okay.
Спасибо, до свидания.
After 3 days.
After 2 weeks.
After 14